Voice, a place where we share stories. I'm Bonnie.
I'm Caroline.
I'm Colette.
And today on the show, we are doing a follow-up to a previous recording that we did called A Soldier's Heart. Today, we have the privilege of hearing a mother's heart, the mother of Gord, who sent her son off to fight a war in Afghanistan. We're going to hear her story of being left at home and how she dealt with it. We welcome Kathie today to Recovering Your Voice.
Well, I am so excited, Kathie, that you're joining us. What part of your story would you like to share with us today and why?
I would like to start at the very beginning when you first asked me, Colette. And the reason I want to start there is that I was so surprised at my reaction. I did not realize that 14 years ago still had could evoke such strong emotions in me. I have been watching media reports on the war in Ukraine, of course, and my heart has been going out to the people of Afghanistan since the Allied troops withdrew. But when you asked me if I would be willing to share my heart in response to Gord's mission to Afghanistan 14 years ago, I caught my breath. I didn't expect to respond that way, and it caught me off guard a little bit. It was a place that I don't think I ever wanted to go back to because it was so difficult. But it's been really good as I've rethought and worked through a lot of emotions that I felt during that time. One of the things in particular that got my attention was you forwarded me the emails that I had sent out during, it was about 18 months, including Gord's workup time, right, to prepare to go. So when you sent them to me and I reread them to refresh my mind, I found I wasn't breathing. I found that I caught my breath, and I didn't even really realize until I got quite lightheaded. And then I realized I haven't been breathing as I've been reading these. And I thought, this is probably a really good thing. Excuse me, this is probably a really good thing that we're going back there. So, excuse me, I think I might have a little frog in my throat. But I'm grateful for the opportunity, very grateful. And I've been thinking about it a lot. And I've been remembering a lot of negative things. But recently, I've decided that even though it was such a dark time, it was also a good time, a very good time, because it helped me see that I still had pent-up emotions that I needed to be able to express, and how important that is. Not only did I not breathe regularly as I was reading those emails, I remembered a lot of good things. I chose to remember a lot of good things that came of that.
What obstacles did you face and what became the pivotal point of your journey, Kathie?
I don't remember if Gord mentioned this in his story. I know that he did an amazing job sharing a soldier's heart, but I don't remember if he told you about the day that he came home. He was living in the city and he came home for the weekend, and he said to his dad and I, "Mom, Dad, I think God is calling me to Afghanistan." And at the time, he was serving in the reserves. And I had always taken great comfort believing that reservists did not go to war. So when he said, I believe God is calling me to Afghanistan, I was shocked and I panicked a little bit. And I thought it will never happen because reservists don't go to war and he has bad knees. I took really great comfort in the fact that he had messed up his knees playing football and soccer. So there was no way that they would take him. So you can imagine how disappointed I was when they decided that his knees were okay and that indeed the reservists were going to go to war. And some people don't really get what's involved, but I come from a military family. My father was in the Air Force. My father-in-law was a fighter pilot in the war. We understand what it means to go to war. We lost my great uncle in the war. My mother lost a much beloved brother that we often heard about. So many families are not affected the same way in which our family had been affected. In one way, I'm glad that he went because my father-in-law was never able to share with his children or his wife about what he experienced as a fighter pilot. And he had a very difficult time showing any kind of emotion to his family at all. So suddenly when Gord was going, that opened up a door whereby he was able to share his experiences. So as much as it affected us negatively, there were a lot of positive things that happened. And for that, I'm very, very grateful. But it was pivotal, I would say, when he did pass his physical and he was going to be going to Afghanistan. And it became very real, the danger that was involved when there was an accident, even in the very beginning of his training here in Shiloh. I believe it was a live ammo accident. And I remember it very clearly because Meghan's fiance and I were driving together in the car when we heard on the radio that there had been an accident. And I believe it was a fatal accident. And this was even before Gord had deployed. It was just at the very beginning. And almost immediately heard that news story and we both held breath and I'm sure our hearts stopped. But he called immediately and said, Mom, you probably heard about the accident out here. Mom, I'm just calling to say it wasn't me. And I very quickly became acquainted with a lot of emotions that I would feel very strongly for the next 18 months. And one of those emotions that I think was the hardest, it's called survivor's guilt. Because when you hear something like that, you immediately think, oh God, please don't let it be my child. And then when you find out it wasn't your child, you feel guilty and you feel ashamed because you're so relieved that it wasn't your child, but you know that somewhere that child's parents and family are hurting terribly now. So that was pivotal, very pivotal for me. It was pivotal that he was able to go, approved physically. It was pivotal that his knees didn't hold him back. It was pivotal that there was a training accident within, I think, 2 weeks of his beginning his training. And when I think about it, it wasn't just pivotal in my heart, it was pivotal in Gord's dad's heart and in his sisters and his brother's heart. And we're part of a big extended family who love each other deeply. And Gord's adventure affected all of us very deeply, very pivotally, I believe. And also we were part of a large church family, biological family and church family. And we were all affected in many ways. And I believe mostly for good, yes.
I remember all of us praying on, like you said, around the clock and regularly for Gord, for his platoon. And it was just so reassuring. I don't know if that's the right word, to hear Gord talk about the occasions where logically they should have experienced a hit. Crossing a bridge, I believe, was one story. And I was thinking that as a mom, you did absolutely everything you knew how to do to bring up that prayer around your son and those that he served with, so that there would be like grace and protection there. And many days I would feel myself holding my breath too and thinking, you know, how hard it would be to experience the same thing, just because I'm a mother, same as you. So I sensed that your heart was out there on the field and could be crushed at any time. So I definitely identified with your investment, because it wasn't just your son going to war, it was the risk of your son going to war and not knowing what the next moment would bring or tomorrow would bring. So to hear that fatality occurred even during their training time, yeah, it must have been a total eye opener as to what was on the line here, what you were risking, what your son was risking, but because he was your son, what you were risking letting him go.
Yes.
I would have, I believe I would struggle with fear and anxiety.
Mm-hmm. I was going to say, Carol, following up on that, fear and anxiety were a constant. And I realized that these were all emotions that I believe that we are spirit, soul, and body, and that they are all intertwined and they affect each other, if you know what I mean. And I felt like I had to be strong. I had to have it all together. I had to not allow these emotions, because they would carry me away and ruin me. But I quickly learned that just the opposite could happen by stuffing them down. When people asked me, "How are you doing, Kathie? That must be so hard for you and your family." for me to say, oh no, everything is great and we're trusting Gord's going to get home and his whole platoon is going to get home and everything will be fine, was a lie. And those were emotions that were starting to build in me like a pressure cooker. And I decided that I needed to be honest with people. And you're right, I don't know how we would have gotten through without the support of our family and our extended families. And to be real and to be honest, because we are human and we are created with all of these emotions. So I decided that I would be honest so that I didn't blow like a pressure cooker. And when people asked me, I would speak the truth and that I would launch a counter attack. Gord was in the physical, right? Launching a counter attack. And you know, he said something that impacted me quite deeply in his interview with you. He said, please don't ask if I shot anybody, because then I feel like I didn't do what I was sent to do. I don't believe Gord's heart was ever there to kill anybody. Gord went to help and to serve and to protect, and lives were changed because he was there for good. And we'll get into that a little bit later. Those are the things that we need to focus on. He didn't go to kill the Taliban. He went to serve and to protect and to help a country that was at war. And his heart was for the children, the widows, the orphans. His heart was there to help, not to kill. And that was never our intent. I spent my days launching a counterattack with prayer. You're right. My kitchen became Kathie's command central for 18 months, literally. My computer was set up. I was ready. I was on there. I was computer illiterate until that time. And you know, you received those emails any time of the day or night. And because Gord was there, he was so aware of what was happening. And I'm not putting down the media. Please hear me. But there were times when I would hear things on the radio and on the newscast, and my heart would shudder at what I heard. And I would wait for the next time he was able to Skype home and tell him, I heard this or I heard that. How are you doing? And he would say, oh, Mom, what did you hear? And I would have been in, distress for hours based on what I had heard. And then he would say, well, Mom, it's really hard to get the truth out. But what actually happened was, and I would find out that it was quite different from what we were hearing back here. And I'd like to say that that only happened once, but no, it happened multiple times. There was a reporter embedded with them at one point. And during that time, it really was like, what do they call it? Feet on the ground or eyes on this story. And we got a lot of very accurate reporting during that time, which was really good. But part of my counterattack was to send out especially prayer requests, because Gord was 6 weeks out in the field on reconnaissance in convoy when those incidents happened, Carol Ann, that you're talking about. with the IEDs, the improvised explosive devices. And he did not share a lot of that with us back home at that time because he did not want us to worry. But after he got back and he was asked to share, I learned a lot of that. And I was so grateful to hear about it, though. One of the stories, if I could share this, excuse me, was, I don't know, I think it's called daisy chain bombing, where the enemy would set up a series of bombs. And then when the convoy was strategically over top of these explosive devices, the Taliban would discharge them. And they had an interpreter with them. So he was able to, and they were able to hear what was going on. And they heard the complete confusion when this daisy bomb sequence that could have taken out their entire convoy did not explode. And there was no good reason for it not to happen, but God. And you know what? Those became, I had two sets of two favorite words during that time. One set was but God, and the other was Gord's words, back safe. So there were a lot of but God. There were many, many but God situations, but those words, back safe, because remember, he was on a different time, right? So when we were getting ready to close down our day and go to bed, he was getting up and getting ready to go on guard duty at the gate or in the hospital. And oh, though that was such a hard time, but at least then they were in the safety, right, of the Kandahar Air Base there, the big base. When he was out on convoy is when he was experiencing the attack of the Taliban. Very hard for me as a helicopter parent, but I also was remembering that he said, Mom, it's amazing how safe we feel and how much peace I have when I'm out there. And I remember him saying how much peace and safety they especially felt when they were accompanied by helicopters. And I thought the actual helicopters that they were fortunate to have go with them a few times only coincided or exemplified the importance of our prayer covering, our helicopter prayer covering over them. So much so that at one time he said, Mom, could I just ask that you might lift that prayer covering just a little bit so we could practice what we've trained for? And I said, no, not a chance. We are praying 24 hours, night and day, around the clock, from coast to coast for you guys. And there's no way we're lifting that prayer covering. But would it be all right to share with you the story of the power of prayer? Izatullah is the best story ever of this entire 18 months. The goodness of God, that Gord was there. And I know it was just one little boy, but it was at the beginning of his mission. It was February, and Gord deployed mid-January, right? And we would Skype face to face as often as we could. And those times were precious. And you have to keep in mind that there were a lot of other soldiers that were wanting to Skype with their families back home. And I remember one time, and he referred to it, and I don't know if Gord shared with you, but he has such a release of tears now. It's just beautiful. And do you know that our tears are precious to God and he saves them? They're precious to the Lord. So whenever he and I and his beautiful wife, and often my granddaughters cry together, it's really precious. But the one time that he called, Skyped with me, oh dear, shortly after, his face was there and he started to tell me about a little boy that had come into the hospital that day. And then he totally broke. And he actually put his head down on the desk in front of the computer. That was pivotal because I saw he was so impacted and I felt helpless. There was nothing I could do to comfort him. But we cried together and we prayed together. And he told me this story and how it impacted him to see this little boy and his grandfather come into CAF or to Kandahar Airfield to the hospital. And half of the little boy's face was gone. And he said, Mom, he couldn't have been more than 4 years old. He was so tiny and so traumatized. And his grandfather was so upset. And he was in the ambulance and they have to pat everything down and go through this whole security process. And he said, I just wanted to pick him up and hold him and tell him it was going to be okay, that we were going to help him at the hospital. And I remember thinking, they don't have doctors that operate on little boys' broken faces. They are military doctors that are there for war injuries, not little boys. But I didn't say that. And only, I think, 2 weeks later, I was watching The Fifth Estate. Do you remember, girls? Do you remember this story? And I had told Gord, we will pray. We will pray for that little boy and his grandpa. We will pray that he'll be able to get his face operated on, that he'll be able to talk, that he'll be able to see, that he'll be able to swallow. And thinking, I'm just stepping out in faith and saying that because I don't know how that's even possible, but God. So what an answer to our prayers then when the Fifth Estate featured that little boy. There just happened to be a facial surgeon from Edmonton, Major Terry Rakowski, just happened to be in the Kandahar hospital that day that little boy came in. And he was able to do a surgery, I believe a number of surgeries, and that little boy was able to leave that hospital and I understand function normally and came back for checkups. And to me, that was just so reassuring that in spite of the tragedy of that little guy getting caught in the crossfire, God already had. He's called a malomaxillofacial surgeon who specializes in reconstructive surgery to faces, even children there at that hospital for that little boy's arrival. It was just an incredible story to me, just pivotal that God answered that prayer so beautifully. But I also realized that was when Gord felt he needed to shut down those emotions because he was impacted so deeply, especially by the children, especially by the children. And I remember when it was all done and he was home again, and I said, would you go back again, son? Given the opportunity, would you go back again? And he said, yes, Mom, in a heartbeat, I would go back.
I need to ask you as a mother, I know that our children are adult and stuff, but would you be able to release him again for him to do what he believed and God was calling him to do?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Well, to be perfectly honest, it would be difficult. It would be very difficult, especially now, because he has a beautiful wife and two wonderful, my granddaughters, my grandies. And perhaps I feel secure that he won't go back because he loves them and he takes his fathering responsibility very seriously. But even as I say that word, responsibility, I'm reminded of something that a very, very dear friend told me once in regards to parenting, that our responsibility as parents is to give our children roots and wings. And that has been coming to my mind a lot lately. And I want to quote something, if I can read it so I get it right. Johann Wolfgang van Goethe said there are only two lasting bequests that we can hope to give our children. One is roots and the other is wings. And then Dennis Waitley goes on to say, the greatest gifts that you can give your children are roots of responsibility and wings of independence. So I was thinking that when Gord was going, and when I saw how deeply he was committed, I believe he said, to live is Christ and to die is gain. So he was prepared to go. And if he survived, he would know that he had done what the Lord called him to do. And if he died, then he would be with the Lord. So he couldn't lose either way. But there was one thing that I would like to say about that suddenly comes to my mind. His fear was that he would come home permanently damaged, that he would lose a limb, or that he would not be able to function normally after serving there. And he was very greatly impacted when he did hospital duty because he saw so much damage in the hospital. He saw Afghani soldiers and police come in to hospital after being attacked, and they would come out of surgery missing limbs and be very traumatized. And being a guard at the hospital, he again had to shield his heart, but it impacted him very deeply because that was probably his greatest fear, that could be him. And he realized the difference. He was in full army regalia, right? Or armor, right? They had incredible armor. They had strong vehicles. Oh my goodness. his fear was when they had to dismount and get out of those vehicles and walk alongside. He had a leader, a sergeant, I believe, who said, if you ever sense anything, even if you don't see anything or hear anything, but I think as moms, we say, if you ever feel something in your gut that isn't quite right, even though you don't see anything wrong, but you sense in your gut, something's just not right here, that their leader would say, tell me, let me know, which was wonderful. And so they would hear things, they would see things, but sometimes just get that gut feeling that something wasn't right. And so they would have to dismount. Now, as a gunner, if Gord was the gunner, he didn't have to. But there were many times that he got out. And I believe there were a number of close calls that they were forewarned about, whether it was something they saw, something they heard, a report that came through, or just in their gut. But when they were out there like that, they were vulnerable. But he was so impacted by the bravery of the Afghani soldiers and the Afghani police, and they paid a really high price. They did not have all of the artillery and weaponry and protection in armored vehicles that our soldiers had. But that was Gord's fear. He had told me that, Mom, I don't want to come back permanently wounded or disabled. But I believe that to live is Christ and to die is gain, but I don't want to come back disabled. So every time he would share something like that, I think we would launch an even stronger counterattack, right? I mean, when he talked about holding Izatullah and wishing that he had something tangible that he could give that little boy, and seeing the kids. Now, in the beginning, I believe that the soldiers were allowed to interact with the children. And when the soldiers came to the different villages, the children would come and gather. I don't know if you remember, it was at the beginning. This is when Meghan's friend lost her brother. Children came and gathered around the soldiers, and the soldiers were interacting, and the children were excited to see them and so grateful that they were there. But the Taliban used that as an opportunity to send, I think it was an old man on a bicycle, looked completely innocent, but detonated an explosive device that killed a number of people. We heard about it because 4 soldiers were killed, including Keith Morley, I believe, at that time. And actually, if you can believe this, my neighbor across the street here, his son was there and he survived. And he went to these soldiers and tried to help as best he could, but he realized he didn't have enough medical training. And he has since retrained and became, I believe, a military doctor as a result of that situation. Yes, I speak to my neighbor fairly regularly. I just found that out not long ago. And just to think that young man was there and he was with those soldiers that were dying and he was comforting them. But all that to say that as a result, then the soldiers were not allowed to dismount and interact with the children along the way, except on Gord's last convoy escort. They were in a very secure place and the children came around. And Gord's sister had sent him a puppet that he could interact with the children, because of course language was a problem, but puppets, they speak a universal language. So I think his name was Barnacle Bart. He was a big puppet, I think a pirate, and Gord was able to interact with the children then and left him there in Afghanistan with one of the children. Gord's heart went out especially to the children who, this sounds very strange probably, but the children who were in the orphanages and the shelters were better looked after than the children who were with their parents, not receiving extra help. So those children would come out and stand along the roadway as the soldiers went by. And because Gord's heart had gone out to Izatullah so much, and he wished for something, prayed for something to be able to give to the kids, our support group, our military support group here, made up hundreds of little packages that were in little baggies with finger puppets for the children and writing material. Some of the children would stand at the side of the road and go like this and want chocolate. Chocolate. Gord said they knew the word chocolate. But others so enjoyed the puppeteering and going like this. They were asking for writing materials. So our group made up hundreds and hundreds of little packets to be able to bless the children with. And you remember, Colette, we sent incredible care packages to Gord. He was our soldier, right? But there were a number who got nothing from home, nothing. So we took it on ourselves, really, Colette, to send extras for them, right? And then I remember Gord saying, Mom, you know what would be so special is if these soldiers got a package from home addressed to them, not just included in his care package, but their very own care package. And I remember you doing that. And when I shared about the impact that it had on our church here now in Manitoba, when our Sudbury church took it on themselves to do that, our church here in Manitoba decided that we would do the same thing, but our pastor decided every one of the members of Gord's platoon would not only have a care package, but would have a prayer partner. And it was organized by our wonderful admin assistant at the church, also a very good friend of mine, so that there was a prayer partner, and for every one of those members of Gord's platoon. So we launched a counterattack, physically, I believe, spiritually, through our prayers, and emotionally. Oh my goodness, we invested a lot of emotion, and we cried together, and we prayed together, and we laughed together and rejoiced together. The support that we had was incredible, and it wasn't just for Gord and his platoon. Now you need to remember that, and I remember and remind myself just now that there were more casualties in the time that Gord was there, and yet his entire platoon came home safe. I think there might have been an incident when the lid of the escape hatch, or whatever that is called, came down and bopped one of the fellas on the head, but he had his helmet on and he was okay. But they suffered no casualties, like no fatalities and no serious casualties. And sometimes people will say to me, well, how could that be? How could that be? Because that was the most dangerous time. And I don't know if you remember, but the Taliban was making a lot of threats, especially towards the end. And Gord's platoon was, we understood 6 months. They ended up staying for 9 months, just like birthing a baby. So there were 3 additional months that they were there and they were at risk. And it did get really nasty and really ugly towards the end, so much so that we decided, our support group, our military support group here decided that we needed to do something more and something major for our guys to know that we supported them. And we organized, Gord's dad was a big part of organizing something called a Red Shirt Rally. We had runs during the year. We had a 5-kilometer run to show our support, but we thought we were kind of winding down after 6 months and then realized they were going to be staying longer. And we organized it at the legislative buildings here in Winnipeg, and hundreds of people, not just military families, but those that celebrated Red Shirt Fridays. Do you remember that? Where we supported all of our military, not just what was going on in Afghanistan, but our police forces, and all across the country, people were wearing red shirts every Friday to show our support in a physical way. And we were able to get photographs of the whole legislative ground. And we had big yellow ribbons, like this, right? Huge. And we were able to send a video, and there were speeches and tributes and prayer. And it was such an encouragement. Gord said it was so encouraging to know that they had the backing of the families back home. And we were there, as many of us as could be there. Now, during this time, my other children were involved in all kinds of other things. Like I think for part of the time, one was teaching English in Korea, and the other was in Japan, and another was learning to jump horses. I tell you, when I prayed Psalm 91 every day, yes, I was praying for all of them, because all of them were having their adventures, and all of them needed that prayer coverage. And while I'm talking about that, there were times when I would try and read my Bible, and it just somehow didn't seem relevant. It just seemed like I was reading the word of God, but it was just bouncing off the ceiling, and it felt like my prayers weren't going anywhere. But for anyone who's feeling fearful or distressed or anxious, I found the Psalms. I found reading the Psalms so comforting, especially the ones where David was in distress and he was calling out to God. So part of my counterattack was reading the Psalms every day. I talked about being body, soul, and spirit. And I confess, I spent many sleepless nights, but when knowing that Gord was out, I slept much better when I knew that he was inside the wire, when he was safe. When he was outside the wire, I just was waiting for him to get back and watching the computer constantly to see back safe. But I realized that I needed to look after my body. So I believe there were even times when I asked you or my praying friends, can you cover Gord in prayer tonight? Can you stay awake and pray until he's home safe? Because I'm exhausted and I need to look after my body. I needed to have a safe place where I could cry and where I could be angry and where I could express my fears and my doubts. And I'm so grateful for the friends and the family that didn't judge me, that understood, that cried with me. But I also realized I needed to feed my spirit. I think we don't give the spiritual part of us enough attention. And I know that for me, I needed to look after my spirit. And that meant for me communing with God, which is praying, which is talking to God, which is saying, God, I'm really scared, and I haven't got it all together. That's for sure. In fact, I think I'm losing it. I need your help here. And then going to the Psalms and finding that they put into words what my heart was crying out. And it was such a comfort to me to try and keep my spirit, my soul, and my body strong was so important. And I don't know how you do that, but I just felt that an emphasis for keeping my spirit strong. And I'm not a Bible scholar. I'm not, but I could get into the Psalms and I could read and I could read and I could cry, and I felt like I had poured myself out. And I found that I could breathe easier. I talked about earlier about finding that it caught my breath. And I soon learned that as I read the Psalms and thought about Gord and how I was crying out for his protection and the protection of my other children, as I said, who were on their own adventures all over the place, I could breathe out, like just that big blow of all the fear and anxiety and stress. And I could just, just expel all of that out of me, and then breathe in life and breathe in relief and release, if you know what I mean. Like when you think about it, as moms, and I'm talking as a mother, we take such care of our babies, even before that. That excitement and that anticipation as moms, we want to look after ourselves. We want to take good care of ourselves so that our baby is healthy and strong. We would do anything for that baby. And then when our babies are born, it's such a privilege and such an honor to be their mom. And I remember Gord talking about realizing that God is not like a parent who sees their baby trying to learn to walk and says, "What's the matter with you? Why can't you walk? Get up and get going." Well, he forgot to tell you that he crawled for one day, and then he decided that took too long and he was going to walk. And I should have had a crash helmet and knee pads and elbow pads on that child, because he fell so much. But we see our babies and we are so proud of them. And we watch them grow, and we do everything we can to protect them and teach them and love them and cherish them and adore them. That's my heart towards my children. And I know that's your hearts, all of you, towards your children. And then we let them play football. Oh my goodness. We don't want to. That was good training for releasing Gord. So when it came time to release him to go with my blessing, I remember him saying, "Mom, I believe God has called me." And I didn't say it out loud, but I thought, I'm going to have words with God about this. He's going to hear from me. And he did, loud and clear. night after night. But I couldn't keep that inside me. I had to let it go. I had to, because that was Gord's mission. Who would I be to stand in the way if Gord believed God called him to go? So would I let him go again if God calls him? Yes. But do I feel pretty secure saying that because of his wife and daughters who he adores? Maybe call it. That was a good question. That was a loaded question you asked me there. Mm-hmm.
Kathie, now that the Allied forces last year have pulled out of Afghanistan, many have said that what happened there for the last 20 years before that was a waste. What do you say about that?
Thank you, Bonnie. I would say, and I've thought about this a lot, and I've actually been kind of surprised at the passion that I feel when people make that comment. Someone recently said to me, I guess that was a waste of time. Your son serving over there, the people that lost their lives, because the situation in Afghanistan is quickly deteriorating, as we know. And I know that the emphasis is on the Ukraine. And I do pray for Ukraine and for Russia and for that whole situation. I do. But because my son was there and so invested in their situation and was so concerned for the interpreters, the Afghan interpreters, especially those that were wounded, they tried to help them with computer training so that they could find work after they were injured. They invested so much, the Canadian soldiers, in trying to help the Afghani people, as did all the Allied forces, I believe. But I can't help but think of the difference that they did make while they were there. And along that line, I'd like to read you something that my daughter-in-law wrote when I told her that I would be doing this program with you. Her name is Meghan, and she and Gord have been married now for 11 years and have two beautiful I have two beautiful granddaughters as a result. But this is what Meghan wrote. Gord would check in as often as he could. I remember being so grateful for modern technology. The time spent on this side of the tour seemed to drag on, as well as out there. Days turned into weeks, and weeks turned into months. There were days that we cried together, and days that we laughed together. Days that we mourned together, especially for that little boy that crossed his path. And in the many emails sent, God's goodness shone through, showing his protection over Gord and his unit and his time spent there. I remember one day he shared with me a photo of my friend's brother's memorial plaque that I was able to share with my friend and her family. They were so grateful. With this most recent Taliban takeover, many seem discouraged, thinking, what a waste of time and money. I'm sorry, but my friend's brother did not die in vain. And my now husband did not go through what he went through for nothing. They provided peace and freedom for the people of Afghanistan. And God knows that. As for the Morley family, they have become incredible spokespeople for the military family. They carry beautiful hearts, even through their grief. Thank you for your courage and willingness to share your journey. You never know who you are helping to heal through your story. I believe Meghan was writing this to Mrs. Morley. I had the opportunity of meeting her, and she's an amazing woman. She lost her son in the beginning when I told you about the gathering of the children, and they called him the bicycle suicide bomber. She lost her boy early on. He is much loved, and they have a beautiful memorial dedicated to the Canadian soldiers who lost their lives fighting in Afghanistan at Kandahar, and it was under construction when Gord was there. So what a privilege for Gord to be able to take a picture of Keith's memorial and send it to his family. He was there at the right time to be able to do that. And he was there at the right time to make a difference. They did make a difference in those 20 years. They did. Let me just read you something. Tens of thousands of girls were able to attend school during that time, not just 1,000. These are statistics. Anybody can find these. I went and did some research because of the response of my heart when someone said that was a waste of time. I wanted to see exactly what did happen during that time when they were there. Tens of thousands of girls were able to attend school starting in 2001. Today, there are tens of thousands of girls that have attended university or are attending now as a result of those 20 years. A generation was changed. Have you watched the media? You have seen the women of Afghanistan rising up and marching in the streets. They would never have done that before, but they received an education during that time. And many of them are fighting for their country over here now. So not just a few, but literally tens of thousands. If you have an opportunity, there was a wonderful photojournalist. She was there from the beginning and continues to go back as often as she can. I want to get the spelling of her name correct. Her name is Lindsay Addario, Addario. She is a photojournalist who specifically focused in on the women of Afghanistan and continues to. We don't hear enough about what is really going on over there. We hear the heartache, we hear the tragedy, we hear the sorrow, we hear the defeat, but we need to try to remember that we made a difference. Gord made a difference. The Allied forces made a difference, especially for the young women of Afghanistan. And Gord would say that made it worth it. He talks, not often, but occasionally he'll talk about it. And it's not always with feelings of joy, but he invested so much there. People did lose their lives there, but it changed the world for the girls and the women of Afghanistan, especially for the children, for the little ragamuffins, he calls them. His heart was touched. And God knows we prayed. We prayed. And do you know that Izatullah, featured on the Fifth Estate, Gord said, Mom, it couldn't have been him because that little boy could not have been more than 4 years old. He was so tiny. The children of Afghanistan have suffered so much. And yet, that little boy was 8 years old. Gord thought he was 4. He was so tiny. We have so much here in our country. Seriously, we complain a lot, but we are so blessed. I think we need to change our perspective. I think we need to realize just how blessed we are. And we need to remember that, yeah, it was 9 months of workup training. Isn't that interesting? From a mother's heart, 9 months of workup training and 9 months of service over there that Gord gave. And the scripture is very clear. It says, greater love has no man than this, but that he be willing to lay down his life for his brother. I suppose brother could be very inclusive for his sisters, for his neighbors, for his friends. Gord was willing to lay down his life to make a difference. Those soldiers that served over there, they were willing to lay down their lives for the people of Afghanistan. It was not wasted. It was not wasted. Not one moment. As hard as it was, as difficult as it was, as gut-wrenching for those who lost loved ones, they did not make those sacrifices in vain. They did not. And the women and the children, the education of those kids, oh my goodness. I think it was worth it. Mm-hmm.
Kathie, thank you for reframing that for us and
Mm-hmm.
giving us a fresh and new and more vital perspective on that. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. You're welcome. Thank you. Thank you for letting me share. I needed to have my heart reminded too. And now I have an even greater burden to be praying for the moms, for all the mothers. You know, we see so often on media the war in the Ukraine, but we need to remember that there are wars all over this world. We don't hear about them. As moms, we can be praying for the mothers in Africa, in Russia, in Afghanistan, all over the world. My heart goes out to those moms. I understand. And you walked this journey with me. And you love your children too. We need to be praying for each other. We need to be lifting up those moms and dads and their children, those families of those affected by war. Thank you for reigniting this burden in my heart. Seriously, ouch, but thank you.
Kathie, just as soldiers are trained for this war, as a mother, Is there anything that you would like to say to the mothers that are training for the war they're facing when releasing their child, son or daughter, into service and protection and honoring? Is there any artillery you can give them for their belt?
Mhm. Mhm. Colette, as a mom who went through this and experiencing all the emotions that I experienced and trying to suppress them in order to appear strong and resolved, I would say, if I was to do this again, I would let it go. I would cry those tears. I would scream those screams, even if it was into my pillow at night. I would find a safe place where I could let it all out, because raising a child is so emotional and it takes so much just to raise them, and then to release them is so difficult. I can't put it in words. And I remember trying to keep that stiff upper lip. Remember, I'm from a British background, right? The stiff upper lip and never let them see you sweat. I say, if you need to find a safe place where you can let it out, my car became a very safe place to let it all out. And going for walks, finding a place where I could be alone and just cry out to God. And it wasn't even like crying at times, it was like groaning. Yes, because, and it would come from the tips of my toes, and I could sense it coming, and I could only press it down for so long. And just to be able to let those sounds out, that grieving, that groaning, I would have done that sooner. I eventually came to that place, but I would have done that from the very beginning, because I think I would call it ugly crying, like really ugly into my pillow, but it wasn't enough just to be sad or feel sad or weep. I needed to be able to fully release all those emotions and to get it out. And then, like that deep breathing that I was talking about, instead of holding my breath and keeping it in and staying resolute, I needed to get it out. And I don't know, I said this before and I can never say it enough. I don't know what I wouldn't have done without the team that backed us physically, spiritually, emotionally. Seriously, it was amazing. Our family, our church family, our extended family, our neighbors, those that invested in us, but probably only very few of you that I could just, that weren't shocked by the vehemence of my emotion and actually came alongside. So to any moms that are facing this, that are going through this, you need a safety net when you're gonna just lose it and fall apart. That's okay, because number one, I believe that God has us. He knows us. He created us. He created us with all these emotions. He knows that we're hurting. He knows that we're feeling. He knows we're pretty angry at him from the very beginning for calling Gord. I was angry. I had to let him know loud and clear. I was angry at God over this situation. All of it for weeks. So just get it out, lay it on the line. He's not shocked. God knows all of this about us already. He knows our innermost being, so he knows it all. But there's a release that comes when we confess it. And when we confess it to each other, because then others realize, wow, Kath's really struggling here. I need to help God be those everlasting arms under her. And the whole family. You embraced us all, and you were there when I was falling apart. You told me that's okay, that's normal, that's healthy. Let it out, girl, just let it out, you would say to me. And when I said, I'm absolutely exhausted, I've got to get some sleep, but I feel like I need God's angels dispatched all around Gord and his platoon. And there were times I just knew something was going on. You know, that mother's instinct that we have that kicks in. I would say, find that close group of friends, true friends who are such a treasure, and share the load. Share the load. I've realized by walking through this and with others, it's a privilege and an honor and a calling to share the load, to share the burden with others that are hurting. So release those emotions. It's healthy, it's good. Find a safety net. Ask for help. Confess when you are struggling. And breathe. Breathe, breathe, breathe. Consciously breathe. Because it wasn't until I was dizzy and felt like I was going to faint that I realized, what's wrong with me? I haven't been breathing. And I would put my hand on my chest and my heart would just be racing. We need oxygen to function. We need it. And for me, the Lord became the air that I breathed and his word. And even when I couldn't speak because I didn't have the words, I could go in the Psalms and find the words that expressed so beautifully what my heart was feeling. When my mind couldn't get them, I could read them, what David went through in the Psalms, and they became like a lifeline to me, because sometimes we just can't find the words. We just can't find the words. But God already had them written there for me in the Psalms. And especially, I found Psalm 91 was on my tool belt every day for all of my children, for all of my family. And as a mother hen, as a helicopter parent, I took great comfort knowing I was not doing this alone. I was not doing this alone. And I became a great believer in angels during that time. I believe that angels, God's heavenly angels, were in those helicopters that stopped those improvised explosive devices from detonating, that gave those soldiers that gut feeling something was wrong, that caused them to explode when they shouldn't have exploded. Not to say there wasn't damage to others as a result. There was. And my heart broke many times. But I know the one who can mend broken hearts and fill us afresh. And again, the importance of feeding the spirit, you have to feed your spirit. You have to feed your will, your emotions with good things, right? And take care of your body. So balance during this time is so important. And the tyranny of the urgent can very quickly take priority over what's important, I found. When I heard something on the radio, which I found out later wasn't the whole truth and nothing but the truth, I think of the time that was wasted going into panic when I should have stopped. I learned this from a counselor one time. When you are feeling rushed and anxious and pushed, stop. Purposefully take a step back and breathe and breathe and breathe. And that takes effort, but it's the best thing that you can do at that time. Otherwise, I would go into full panic mode and all these emotions, right, would come in and my body would begin to tremble and my breath would stop and my heart. It's a very physical experience, panic. It's very alarming. And then it sets off even more triggers, right? But if I could just stop, even for a moment, and step back, and I would physically sit back, take a step back if I was standing or walking or driving, pull over. Heard the news report, and you see what happens is when something like that happens, they shut down communication with your soldier. You don't hear from them. When Gord was in training, we did. But when he was in Afghanistan, it could be hours, even longer, that we wouldn't hear from him. All communication is shut down so that the loved ones can be notified and an investigation is done. Then you hear from your loved one that they're okay. And then along with that comes all the emotions that I talked about before. Survivor's guilt. Oh, thank God it's not my child. But that is someone's child or husband or brother or cousin or friend or loved one. You know what I mean? Their son or their daughter. People are grieving now because they have lost their loved one. Then you feel guilty. So all that to say, realize that you are just human and you are a mother. You are created with all of these emotions. Some of them are wonderful and some of them are so incredibly painful, but don't carry it by yourself. And it's very humiliating. It's very humbling. But remember, God is close to those of a broken, contrite, humble spirit. And you want God so close, and your friends. It doesn't have to be a whole bunch of friends, and it probably won't be. I mean, we had hundreds of people praying and loving and supporting us. But you'll soon find out who the ones are that are really invested in what you are going through. And those are the ones that want to be there for you. Those are your faithful, faithful friends. So have God as your most faithful friend, right? Through thick and thin, through fear and anxiety and panic and brokenheartedness, distress, but have those few choice friends who are real treasures. And you'll find out very soon who those are, and share with them and be real and breathe. Just breathe out the angst and in the, I call it the breath of God, the breath of refreshing, the breath of life. Remember, he breathed into us when he first created man, right? We are made in the image of God, and his breath of life breathed into us from the very beginning. So breathe. Mm-hmm.
Kathie, I find it amazing that Gord's sharing his story and you sharing your story have the common element of reach out to each other, reach out for relationship, that you're not going through this alone, that's when it shifted, when people shared their story with each other and invited them into the hurts and the pain and a Me Too moment. So thank you for reminding us we need each other so desperately. Yes, the Lord first, but he also knows we need relationship with each other too.
Mm-hmm. Amen. Amen. We sure do. Thank you. Thank you for giving me this opportunity and for unearthing maybe some things that were hidden down there that I wouldn't have realized, except the physical manifestation. You can't muster those up or create those, right? So you're giving me this opportunity, I believe, is like, what would we say, call it another layer of the onion being peeled away to find out what's really down there, right? That needs to be uncovered so we can deal with it. And I think the term greater faith comes to me. You know, sometimes when we struggle, we need to be able to look back and remember, like I needed to look back at those emails that you saved that I have not wanted to look back at. I have not wanted to remember. I wanted to just put that away and not have to look at it or deal with it or even acknowledge that it still had an impact on me. So you gave me the privilege of going back there. It was necessary for me to go back there and to remember the goodness of God, but also to experience those emotions again and acknowledge that they were very real, and that as much as I want to be super mom, super Christian, superwoman, I'm not. We're all just moms with mothers' hearts, right? That cherish our children so much, but need to learn and be reminded of his faithfulness. Because looking back, I see afresh, in a different perspective, God's hand all over that season, right? As sad and alarming as it was at times, now that I look back, now that I'm not in the midst of it, you know, I reopened that door and had a look, and it's good. Ouch, but good. Yeah, good. Thank you.
We welcome Kathie to the podcast today.
Whoa.
You can hear Gord better, so he should probably do the interview. I can
I don't think so.
all my
honey.
notes.
Nice try, honey.
Yeah.
Wow. Okay, I'll hide my toilet paper roll right back here.
Ready? Scene 2. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
She was about to break out into, the night before Christmas, Colette was. She sprang from the bed to see what was the matter.
I see the green. I see the green. I see the light. Hallelujah.
There we go.
Glory to God.
Okay.